Hello, world! Welcome! I'm Frank Boucher, and today I want to talk about GitHub. And I was talking with one of my friends recently, and he was telling me, Frank, there's so much stuff that just came out because we did the. How do you call it? Like, you know what? Let's introduce him. Sebastien, how are you?
Hey, Frank, great seeing you again, man. GitHub Universe, that's what you were talking about. We had
Excellent.
GitHub Universe a couple of months ago, and boy, we announced a ton of great stuff. So we're super excited to be here, share some of that great stuff that we've been shipping to all of our developers around the world. Name me Sebastiano Calve or Seb. And essentially, I'm here representing GitHub. I've been in the company for about a year, and my role is just to make sure that GitHub and Microsoft are playing well together. We have a unified message for our customers.
Excellent.
Now,
And I know you didn't come alone today, so who did you bring with you?
that's right. So because I'm the least technical person and I need some help, I brought Damien with me. So Damien's going to be joining me.
Hi, how are you?
I know that guy.
Yeah, we know each other. Go way back.
So, Damien, you have multiple demo today. So, do you want to make a little tour so people know what they should expect from today's demo?
Sure. Yeah. So we're going to kind of go from start to finish. We're going to talk about planning our work in GitHub, and we're going to talk about like doing the work, cutting code and things in CodeSpaces, and then we're going to build and deploy using GitHub Actions. So those 4 demos are going to be issues and projects, CodeSpaces, and then a couple of actions ones. So actions and some of the newer features of actions in that second demo.
Yeah, that's look awesome. And you know what? I've been less coding for the past few 2-3 months. I was looking my commit chart recently, and I was like, oh, that was quiet. I was busy on something else. But I used to do a lot of GitHub, and you know what? During all those demos, we pre-record the demo, so like we know everything is smooth. I learned something new. So if you're a user of GitHub, you may learn too something. And if you have questions, this is a live show, so there's a chat. Answer, like ask your question, not answer your question. That will be very strange. But ask your questions, and the 3 of us will will answer, and we'll probably also answer it on camera. But during the show, we will be also in the chat. And if you're watching on demand, well, write it in the comments section. And my favorite thing is reaching out again to my guests and telling them, hey, you know what? You have a question. Please go there and make sure. So all along for the next hour, at any moment, if you have a question, GitHub related, because today the topic is GitHub, ask it, and we'll make sure to make the question find you back. I think I'm ready. Are you ready, guys?
Let's jump in.
Start right
Let's
away.
jump in.
You know what?
Yeah.
Let's start right away. So, Damien, this
Yes.
first demo, first, before, like I know you and you're famous already. Like I mentioned that before, but maybe someone doesn't know who's Damien. You wanna introduce briefly yourself? What do you do at GitHub, or what's your bio?
So we know each other because we were on the developer relations team at Microsoft, and I moved across to GitHub. So I do DevRel at GitHub, which lately, because of travel restrictions, means I don't fly a lot anymore, but a lot of videos, live streams, and all that kind of stuff as well. So really, I get to learn all the cool GitHub stuff that's being released and get to show it off, which is really good, really exciting stuff.
And in the next segment, that demo we are doing, this is not you presenting, right?
No. So we were lucky enough. So my colleague Roselle is based in New York, but she's actually on vacation already. But she pre-recorded this demo, and she's going to be looking at kind of managing your project and planning your project, something that you traditionally do maybe using other tools. But one of the newer things with GitHub is GitHub Issues, and the project management has kind of started from scratch. So yeah, she's going to show off some of that.
Wonderful. So let's have a look. So Rizal, I heard a lot of good things about issues during the GitHub universe. So can you tell me more?
Yeah, we have a lot of exciting stuff. I want to show you about the new task list, our new project board, and also our new issue templating. So first I'll start off with like how task lists can help you to create even more issues. So let's say you have a open source project, or you're just working on a project and someone says, okay, we need to do this. We need to like redesign the website. And you want to create a task list. Obviously, by clicking this, you can create a task list, but I also have some written tasks. So let's say I want to implement dark mode, use Tailwind CSS, and change the typography. If I submit a new issue, obviously what we're used to is seeing these like checkboxes here. But now when you hover over them to the right, you'll see this little circle. What you can do that's really cool is you can convert these to issues. So once I convert these to issues and you go into that issue, you're allowed to like edit it and give a little bit more context into that issue. You can also see that this issue is connected to the one that it was mentioned in earlier. So if I click tracked in number 4, we'll see that this is, it was mentioned here and created in the task list. That way you'll be able to figure out like, why was this created? What's the history here of this issue?
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
So you could create a nitpick with different tasks, or like if some part of the task is not yet done, you could like push it to the next sprint by creating like a sub task or something like that. That's pretty cool. I like that. That's definitely useful.
Me too. I think it's awesome. And the other thing I want to show you is our issue templates. So people may already be familiar with these. And what I'm going to do right now before I go forward is delete this file so I can just show you how it works. So what people are already familiar with is our regular issue templates. I'm going to refresh one more time. Okay. But our regular issue templates, which are written in Markdown. And in Markdown, basically, the issue we have here is you can't really require certain fields to be submitted, and anyone can just say they don't want to answer this and move on, or they may miss the fact that you wanted them to answer it. So what I'm going to do is create a different type of template that has like required fields for the user to answer, or for the contributor to answer.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, thank you. I want to make sure this gets deleted though, so that I can recreate it. Oh, I didn't commit it. Hold on a second. Changes. Okay, cool. So I'm going to create a new bug report. And the way that this works, or a good new bug report issue template, the way that this is going to work is you have to write it in YAML. If you're not too familiar with YAML yet, or you're not sure you'll get the indentation right, in GitHub's documentation, we actually have an example right here in this tab.
Oh, perfect. To get started.
To get started, exactly. Like you can go ahead and edit it how you want, but I'm going to copy the code here, and then I'm going to go ahead and paste it in. And I'm going to name this bug report.yaml. And as we can see, you can specify a couple of things in the YAML, where you can specify like the type of labels that you want to be on it. You can specify what type of fields you want it to be, whether it's Markdown, whether it's a text area, a dropdown, or a checkbox.
Okay, so that YAML file is really different. It's a definition of a form where I will enforce some type of interactivity, saying, okay, this field is required. Here you need to specify through a list your drop down, like the version of whatever you're using and stuff like that. So like people know what I'm expecting from them. Exactly.
Exactly. That way you have like a standardization of what type of issues you want to come in. That way people are not just like, this is broken. Now you can ensure that you're getting the details of what is broken and like what they think happened and what they would prefer. So now that I've committed that new issue template, if a person comes in and they create a new issue and they say, I want to file a bug report, what they'll see now is these fields, right? Very cool. And the fields either have a text area, and right here, as you can see with that red asterisk, it's saying this is required. Like you can't submit the issue. It's like grayed out because you don't have all checked off all of the required fields. And as you can see here is the checkbox as well. So it just makes sure that like the issues that are coming in are standardized, you can work with them, and it's more clear to the person that's submitting the issues.
Yeah, way more productive, because then like you can start working right away, like no information is missing.
Exactly. And the last thing I want to show you is the new project board that we have. So everyone should probably be familiar with our previous project board where you can, it's just a Kanban style where you can to do in progress or done. Now, if you go to your profile and you'll see that you have the option to do the beta new project or the regular new project. I'm going to pick the beta one so you can see what it looks like. And here you're met with like this little table, and you can add specific issues from your repository. So I know we just made one in the repo that I had called deploy with actions. And one of the issues we had was like use Tailwind CSS, which is really cool, right? Like I can put redesign website and all that in here. You can choose the assignees. I'm the only one in this. You can choose the status, if it's in progress or not, and you can actually add custom fields. You can say like maybe the date it's due and change it to a date field. It's very cool. You can even like group it or sort it by the status, or group it by the status as well. So it allows for a lot of flexibility. And I think it's going to be a really big game changer. I know a lot of people use GitHub to do pull requests, but they're using different platforms for issues. I think now you can do it all in one right here.
Yeah, I love it. And I will go change a few version using the latest beta to try that, because I'm a big user of all those things. Well, thank you. And now let's go join the chat to see their questions.
Okay.
That was cool.
Yeah, I would say as the least technical person, this is the one feature that gets me the most excited, just to be able to plan. It's almost like a to-do list, but supercharged.
Wow. Like I mentioned in the demo, I really do or used to do live coding session, and like that thing, the form and everything will be really fantastic. I have a question based on that. Like I noticed in their title, it was like between square bracket, it was bug. Do I need like what's the purpose of that?
I think really that was just the kind of placeholder thing. So it's a good way to kind of easily identify when you could just see the title that this one is a bug. The other thing obviously is labels. In the template format that you can use, or not the template but the issue form format, you can specify what labels it has, what the default values for fields are, and then the title. So the docs, and I'll paste the link in the chat as well, but the example that they have there has that bug colon in the title, and it just means you have a starting point. You have something to start with.
Like links will probably don't works in the chat.
Okay, I won't do that
for security purposes, but we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. So like the show notes, Ryan, you should display the show note links. And now Ryan is panicking, clicking a bunch of buttons. So all the links we'll be sharing today will be in that page over there, or probably just down below that video, depending on where you're watching.
Awesome.
And okay, so definitely, so I thought it was maybe that's how you define a template, like using the square bracket, but that's not it. It was just placeholder.
Yeah, it is. It's something that a lot of people use though, so that's why it's in our example. The other thing that we tend to use at GitHub a bit, at least in our team, is we use emojis. Like we use, you get full, tech support. So we tend to use like an actual little bug at the start of our bugs, just to make it a little bit easier. You can do that in the labels as well. So you can have the bug label having a little bug in there as well. Yeah, a little bit, makes it a little bit more fun.
I see a question. I don't know if you want to answer it right now or wait for a later segment, but we have, is it possible to add approval flow when you create a project?
So I think an approval flow from the manager to work on a bug or task or release. Not really, I don't think. So the general idea with issues is if you have permission to look at the issues and the boards and so on, then you can self-assign. You can do that kind of work. I'm just thinking about ways that you might be able to do this. You could probably change permissions for those boards and then only allow certain people to put assignees in potentially. I don't know the details of that. You could probably do something like that if you really wanted to. The way that issues and boards and things have been developed is trying to make it free to do the work the way that your organization works. So we're not telling you, hey, everybody should use Scrum or this agile framework. We're putting the tools in place and then you operate the way that you want. So I imagine you could probably work around something like that with permissions, but I don't know off the top of my head that one specifically. Yeah.
Good. And any quick question, Seb? We have like
Yeah,
a few.
I mean, yeah, Reusable show the new board, which is really cool. But I don't know if I got to see. So there's a question like, can you change that, how you view that board, and what are the different types of views that you get, right? Can you customize that view?
Yeah. So the funny thing with speaking to the team is the competitor for any software project is a spreadsheet, right? There's companies that run on spreadsheets. So there's the table view that we saw, and then there's a board view. Those are the two views that are available to you at the moment. But you can filter, you can group by fields, you can put your own custom columns and group and filter by those. Just in this last week, a new feature's come out where you can choose the column that your boards are used by. So any single select or iteration field, and iteration is a relatively new custom field as well. So there's active development going. Yeah, there's huge customization ability, and there will be more coming. Not really anything I can talk about right now, but there are more views on their way.
Okay, interesting. Well, you know what? That's we'll have time. Like, so in the chat, ask question. Maybe we'll know more.
Are you a list kind of guy, or are you a boards kind of guy? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. I'm a boards guy. Yeah,
I like boards. I use that too in my streams. Though, like I use boards in my stream. I'm a big fan of Git Kraken, but like it's GitHub connected and everything, so it was all there anyway. Let's transition to the next segment. Damien, can you tell us a little bit more about this next demo coming up?
Yeah, so let's imagine we've moved on. We've done all of our planning, and it's time to actually pick up and do the work. CodeSpaces is one of those things that really kind of changes the game when it comes to developer productivity, like the inner loop, getting new people working on code and all of that kind of stuff. It's really exciting. I did a bunch of stuff with GitHub Universe with CodeSpaces, but in this next one, Roselle's going to show this as well. She's going to just walk through really quickly using CodeSpaces to cut the code.
Wonderful. So let's watch that, and we'll come back with more live questions. So I do a lot of code with the community, and sometimes I need to jump on a repo, or they want to help me and start working on an issue, but they don't know, like they don't want to install everything locally. And I heard CodeSpace could really help us. And you also told me you have a great demo about it.
I do. Yes. So I would be happy to show you, and I completely understand how you feel. Sometimes I'm demotivated when it's like, oh, I have to switch and set up my environment just to see this one problem that someone's having. So here we are in my repo called Deploy with Actions. And if you click the green button that says code on it, you may be used to it, like showing how you could set it up locally with GitHub CLI or Git clone or whatever. But now you have a new tab that says CodeSpaces. And what you can do is you can go ahead and click Create New CodeSpace. I already have it opened in another tab just because it takes a little bit more time. So I'm just going to go ahead and switch over to that tab. Okay. So the cool thing about CodeSpaces is it's not a lot to set up. It looks very similar to Visual Studio Code, which most people may be familiar with. Here you can do live sharing like you may be used to. You can have Git Lens. You could also install extensions like GitHub Copilot and all the other works. But what I really wanted to show you is that you can have your environment up and running. You can see like your local page right away. Well, local within the browser. So what I'm going to do is run npm run start. And once I do that, it should start up a new page for me. And as we can see, it says, hello world, it's Reusable. What I can go ahead and do is if I wanted to change this to pink, and this is just a React app, if anyone's curious, we refresh, we should see it update to pink. It's a little bit bad for the eyes, so maybe I'll change it to black. But for me, that's CodeSpaces. It's very cool where you can go ahead and edit in real time and just refresh the page. You can add NodeMon. Now you don't really have to like install all those new dependencies and figure out what's missing and what's going where. You can just edit straight from your browser. And I find it like very convenient, and I get my work done much quicker, or I get it started much quicker because I'm not dreading the whole setup beforehand.
So as a repo owner, I can define that dev environment. So they like when they spawn like a new instance, everything that they need is there ready, and they just like F5 it, like, you know, start debugging or whatever.
Yes.
So it runs, and they could start helping me or visualizing like the app that is in that repo. That's very, very useful. And like you said, like it's just like VS Code. So it's a tool that is very popular that a lot of people already know. So feel like home.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
Exactly.
Well,
all I have.
Thank you. And now let's go see what the chat has for questions.
Yes.
Awesome demo, small but super powerful. So we've got a question, and I'll start with a basic one, which, how can I turn on CodeSpaces?
Yeah, so if you the docs should show you what plans CodeSpaces are available for. But if you go to your organization settings, which you can do by going to github.com/whatever your org is, and then in the menu at the top, going to settings and scroll down to CodeSpaces, you can turn CodeSpaces on for everybody in your repository, turn it off, or turn it on for specific people. So you can just say these people have access to CodeSpaces if you want to as well. So you can restrict it that way. You will need a billing plan and a way to actually pay for CodeSpaces because everything runs in VMs on the cloud. It's not free. So yeah, you'll need to do that, but you can turn it on through settings.
What would you say is like why CodeSpace is such a game changer, you think?
Yeah, so I mean, the story I always go to is like the first developer job that I got outside, like after university, which was for a government department, which may or may not affect the story. But it took about a week before I got a machine that I could do any work on. And then it took another couple of weeks before I could actually cut any code, because there's always that stage at the start of a project where you have to set up the dependencies and the libraries that are being used and the correct versions of everything, and then get your IDE set up and all that kind of stuff. The big story with CodeSpaces is all of that stuff is kind of lives in the repository and is on the cloud. So our hero story is GitHub, which is what we call github.com/github/GitHub. So the repository that builds github.com. Yeah, a lot of GitHub words in there. We can go from scratch, brand new CodeSpace, ready to code in about 10 seconds now with CodeSpaces. So we actually use CodeSpaces to write github.com, which means for a new developer or somebody jumping onto a new project, you're productive immediately. There's none of this installing the right versions of Node and .NET and whatever else you need. Yeah, dramatically speeds up productivity.
That's cool. I like that. I see a question in the chat, and I want to change it a little bit. So is CodeSpace available? Like, can we use CodeSpace for free with some limitation, or like, is it always paid, or like, how does that work?
Yeah, CodeSpaces itself is always paid, but CodeSpaces is built on a lot of technology that you can take advantage of now. So one of the extensions that you can install for Visual Studio Code, and you can do that for Visual Studio Code in your own machine right now, is it's changed its name a couple of times. I think it's the GitHub repositories extension. And what that allows you to do is connect to a repository remotely. So you don't have to clone locally on your machine. What that doesn't give you, though, is local debug and things like that. So that's kind of part of the way. You get that same behavior as well, by the way, in GitHub if you press the dot key. So I don't know whether you've tried that. I thought it was a little bit gimmicky when I first started, but any repository, visit any repository and hit the dot or period or full stop key on your keyboard, and it will open github.dev, which is a web-based version of VS Code that you can legitimately do work on. It's just there's no server behind it, so you can't compile or debug. I use it all the time. Like, I thought it was a gimmick, but honestly, I reckon about 75% of the time I'm changing code, I'm just doing it with that because it's so fast.
Yeah, there's
so that one's free.
Tons of times where you don't need a full IDE and you just want to edit a couple of lines of code and recompile it, or that's kind of the benefits. But for CodeSpaces, it is available right now for teams and enterprise for the full CodeSpaces with a server.
Okay. No, what I use the dev environment or the online editor. What I like about that one is when I need to edit or compare quickly different files in different folder using the web interface and go up, and then now I have the full kind of 3 view of the files, the folder structure, and now I can navigate faster. And that I use that a lot for this, and then trivial update. Yes, a YAML file. We'll talk about that very soon. But, those things that doesn't require a compiling or something like that.
Exactly. The other thing that the web editor is really good for, by the way, is reviewing pull requests. So if you go to an actual PR, like a pull request in GitHub, and press dot, then you get the web editor, but you get it in the context of reviewing that pull request. So you immediately see the diff, like the changes for the files, what files are changed, and you're given a window to leave your comments and approve and those kinds of things. So in the context of the whole project, in in VS Code that you're used to. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question, and I think it's a really good question from Gosal. So, I want to know the difference, because we talked a little bit about the two. So, what's the difference between the full-fledged CodeSpace and the dot editor, the online editor? So, clearly, what's the difference between those two?
Yeah, the big difference is the server. So, pressing dot ultimately just takes you to github.dev / whatever the repository is, and there's no server behind that. All of that is running in your browser. It uses the remote repository extensions to kind of do that, a lot of that work, but if you hit F5, it's not going to work. Or if you go to the terminal, that's not going to work. There's no server behind the scenes. What it means in practice is you can't debug, you can't run npm or anything like that, but you can install some extensions. So you still get things like syntax highlighting, linting in some cases, any other extension that can run entirely in the front end, you can get that as well. CodeSpaces, though, is basically VS Code running on a hosted VM. So you get the power behind it, you get the machine behind it. So you can debug, you have a terminal, you have root access by default as well to that VM, so you can do anything you want in that environment.
Yeah, in Rizal demo, she was using I forgot, there was a JavaScript framework. So it was very simple, but it could have been a .NET one, so compile and then run. And I don't have the code locally. It just create a VM or container, whatever, something on the server side, and it runs there. So that's the full-fledged version of CodeSpace.
That's right. Yeah. It's basically just like a machine that you can access in the cloud that's fit for purpose. It's specifically for that repository, ready to go for that project.
And you can choose the size of the machine as well, by the way. You can choose how much memory, what's the CPU. So if you have really beefy environments and you want something more beefy, you can actually do that.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. So the time is flying. So quickly, when I'm sharing that, does people start with my environment or with the recipe of that environment, and then there will be another instance?
Yeah. So out of the box, if you just start a CodeSpace in just an environment that hasn't had CodeSpaces configured, you get what we kind of nicknamed the kitchen sink image, and it has tools for .NET and Python and JavaScript and all of those kinds of things. But you can set up a dev container that specifies anything you want and a Docker image that contains anything you want. So you have pretty much full control over what environment you're going to be in. But out of the box, you get a lot of tools that can work with, .NET and Node and Python and all sorts of stuff. If you start one, you'll see there's a link to the specs of the machine and the environment.
Wonderful. So I see the time is flying. So let's move on to the next segment. And now we're going to, so we did the project management, we start working. So what's next, Damien?
Yeah, so next, we've written all this great code. We want to actually put it somewhere. So we're going to look really briefly at CI, so continuous integration, but mainly we're going to look at deployment. So GitHub Actions is really good for all of this stuff. But deployment, it's actually quite powerful to do that as well. So I thought we'd start and look at deploying to multiple environments.
Perfect. So, while you're watching that video, if you have any question, leave it in the chat and we'll get back to you just after this. So Damien, Reusable, we saw that we can manage our project, we can code, but I know there's a way to make some automation. So can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing we normally talk about is like, how do we get that code into production? How do we build it, make sure it compiles, do all of that great stuff with pull requests and all that kind of thing. And GitHub Actions is your answer there. Now, most people kind of know that GitHub Actions is a great way to build, like do continuous integration and build your application, run your tests. But there's a little bit less understanding that it's also good for deployment. So what I thought I'd show you is a deployment process, or a couple of ways you can do some deployments through environments in a safe way using some of the features in GitHub Actions. Wonderful. So yeah, so I'm actually going to switch projects because I'm a bit more familiar with this one rather than the one that Reusable is using. So this is just a basic .NET web application. It looks like this. It's an ASP.NET core with a little bit of ASCII art going on. But it's not so important. Yeah, do you like the little .NET guy? And Mona, of course, the GitHub logo. Perfect. GitHub mascot. So I'm going to make a little change, and we're going to talk about what I'm actually doing. It's a really simple, I'm just going to change that background color. So I'm going to use the web editor, which means I can just hit the dot and it will open a web editor for me. It's kind of like a serverless code space. There's no server sitting behind it. It's just a really nice way of editing. So I'm basically in VS Code. I'm going to change this background to, let's see if we can just get a rough .NET purple. There we go. In that CLI example. And then my change, I'm just going to undo that change. Don't need that one. My change is just going to be this, change to purple. So I'm going to commit this change. And because I'm working kind of on the server already, I don't need to do a push. I'm not cloning this locally. Nothing's on my local machine. I'm just using this kind of feature of GitHub. So let's go back to that repository and we'll go to actions. And I want to talk about some of the actions we've got going. So the CI one is the one that you'll see straight away. So this is our CI build. Now I'm actually doing a couple of funky things here. I don't want to talk about this one too much. It's not that interesting. This is just your compile. What I'm actually doing is doing a matrix compile. So I'm building it across Ubuntu, Windows, and Mac on hosted agents in parallel across multiple versions of .NET. So this is just a bit of a fancy way of doing a continuous integration. So I know that it compiles and my tests run. So I'll end up with, an artifact, a thing that I can deploy. I know that my change has worked. That one's not the interesting one though. So I'm going to move on to publishing, and we're going to talk about actually deploying this out to production. So what I could do here, and it's a great way of working, is when my change gets pushed to my main branch, I will do this build and then I'll deploy to a test environment and then I'll deploy to production, for example. What I've done here is actually used a workflow dispatch event. So this is a manual trigger. And the main reason is just to kind of make it easier to show you these things working. We'll have a look in our repository. I'll just jump back to this web editor and you can see this publish YAML file. Now, all of the builds, let's collapse that. All of the build or the workflow definitions are defined in YAML. in GitHub Actions. So you can see I've given it a name. There's a series of triggers. So when I create a release in GitHub, it will trigger this, this deployment to happen. And I've also got a workflow dispatch. So this is a manual trigger, and I'm asking for an input, which is, am I going to go to staging or continue and go to production? Beyond that, this is pretty standard GitHub Action stuff. I have a series of jobs. These jobs can run in parallel, but in my case, I'm going to do them in series. So do staging first. The first job is deploying to staging, and I'm going to use environments. Now, I'll talk about environments in just a sec because that's pretty important. I'm even giving it a URL. So this is my staging environment. I'm running this deployment on an Ubuntu machine. I'm checking out my code. I'm setting up .NET. I'm building, I'm publishing, and then I'm using the Azure Web Apps Deploy action. So the series of steps that you can use in GitHub Actions include a bunch of ones to deploy. So in my case, I'm using this one published by Azure, which will deploy a web app. A couple of things to notice here. I'm using some secrets here. This is a syntax for pulling some secrets out. And the environment is going to change as a result. I'm deploying to the slot, the staging slot in this case as well. When that staging deployment finishes, I'm going to go to my production environment. Now, this says explicitly that it needs staging to have run first. And it's going to do the same steps, the same set of steps. I basically just copied and pasted these. It's using the same secret name, and we'll talk about how we get that out in just a second. But these are basically the steps. We can jump back to actions, and that's actually continued all the way through, I think. Actually, no, it hasn't. We didn't kick that off. I'm going to kick that off now. Let's do publish. I'm going to run that workflow, and I'm going to say this is going to go all the way to prod. So we'll run that workflow, and we can see what happens as that fires off. We'll just wait for it to refresh the UI, and you can see, there we go, that's running. So this is going to deploy to staging, and it's going to hopefully update the background color to that nice purple in staging. Now, what it's also going to do is it's going to stop before it gets to production. And the way it's going to do that is by using those environments that I specified. So if I go to settings for my repository up in top right, scroll down to environments, you can see I've got two environments set up. The same names as was in the definition, staging and prod. If I go into prod, you can see two interesting things. One is environment protection rules. I can zoom in a tiny bit for that. I'm basically saying I have to approve a deployment to this environment. So it's going to stop and wait for me to say, yes, this looks good. The other thing that's in here is we have these environment secrets. So this same environment name exists for staging and for production. And this is my web app publishing profile. So I've basically just put that in here. When I deploy to staging, it will use that value. When I deploy to production, it'll use the value for the production environment. Yeah. And that's really all there is to it. If we jump back to this action, we should see it's sitting there with a little clock on there saying it's deployed to staging, and we can click on that link, and there we go, it's purple. So we've made that change in staging. Production is still blue. We haven't changed that yet. And I can review that deployment and say, you know, it looks good to me. Let's approve and deploy, and it will run through those tasks, those steps to deploy to production, and then production will be updated as well. So just in that really simple way, by defining the environments and then the environment protections, and then using any steps, any tasks, any actions that you want to use, you can kind of control those deployments through your environments really easily.
That's excellent. And today you show us this using .NET and deploying in Azure, but there's many different combinations possible, correct?
Yeah. I chose Azure because I'm familiar with it, and .NET because I'm familiar with it. But there's more than 10,000 actions available in the marketplace, all sorts of languages, all sorts of platforms. You can build anything and deploy to anywhere.
Wow, amazing. 10,000 means so many questions. So let's join the chat and see what we have. Thank you.
That's awesome. What a great demo. I'm going to jump into it. When we think about automation in the DevOps space, we usually think about CI/CD mostly, but I've seen actions used for many other things. Damien, what other things can you use with actions?
Yeah, so it's definitely good for CI/CD. There's a huge list of triggers that can basically kick off a workflow run, and they're not just pushing stuff to a repository or doing a pull request. There's things like leaving comments on an issue, working with APIs as well. So you can do manual runs, and you can also do API-driven runs. You can do scheduled runs. You can call workflows from other workflows. So some of the things that we've seen, I know we do this a lot inside GitHub. We actually manage all of our permissions across various applications by making changes to a repository. But there's also actions that we run when people leave comments on issues. So I've run a demo, for example, a couple of times where people leave a hex color code in an issue comment, and then it'll change my light to that color. So you can do all sorts of stuff. And you reminded me as well, there's 11,000 actions now, more than 11,000 in the marketplace. So, we haven't gained 10 since we recorded that, but sorry, I haven't gained 1,000 since we recorded that. But
keeps growing.
It keeps growing.
Yeah. And now in the demo, you did a build for CI, and then you did a build for staging and a build for production. Is that redundant?
Yeah, it is. So that was mainly for demo purposes, just so I could click a button and kick it off rather than having to make a change and so on. What I would generally recommend is having that multi-stage kind of workflow, which is what we did to staging and production, but do a CI run and a build, and then get that artifact and upload that artifact, and then in your staging deployment, pull down that artifact. Then when you go to production, pull down the artifact again and deploy it. That way you're deploying the same compiled code to staging as you are to production. That's my preference. I like doing it like that because you're deploying the exact same bits. But a lot of people will do it by branch, or they'll do it a different way. So I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I would probably not in real life do it the way I did in that demo, but demo code.
Yeah, demo is not real life. And now we need to move on to the next segment, and it's Diego's wall. So always happy to have Diego on the show. And like today, my question is: do you know what have in common, or can you make the connection between comics, Mona Lisa, and IT? Let's watch the video and learn what it is. Hello, Diego. How are you?
Hello, Frank, and hello, world. I'm doing good. I'm Diego. As you know, I'm here in my office in Seattle, surrounded by these walls. And as you know, Frank, I use them to nurture my sense of wonder. But I also use it to share it with others, with you.
Today, and what do we have for us today?
Today we have a funny story, Frank. Funny story. The question today is, what is the most famous painting in the world? What would you say if I ask you the most famous painting in the world?
The Joconde.
The Joconde, the Mona Lisa. Yes, by Leonardo da Vinci, who was, by the way, a great man. I highly recommend people to read his biography, not just in any format, but in graphic novel format. I want to recommend this. I've been reading this Campfire Heroes series, and they have these biographies, Gandhi, real life heroes, Mother Teresa, Abraham Lincoln, Nelson Mandela, even the Beatles right here, my favorite band. And it's illustrated for kids, but also for adults. Now, why is it the most famous painting? Is it because the smile is special, like many people say? That sometimes he's smiling, sometimes he's not smiling? Is it because the way it looks, the symmetry of the face? I heard it all. No, those are not the reasons. I want to share with you that the reason why the Mona Lisa is the most famous painting in the world is because of this paper that I have right here. It's a newspaper from 1911, and it shows two people stealing the painting. So if you can put, Frank, the picture on the screen so we can see it better. That is actually a newspaper from 1911. Turns out that in 1911, there was a gentleman called Vincenzo Perugia who wanted to steal a painting from the museum. And he chose the Mona Lisa. There was nothing special about it. Of course, it's a great work of art by Da Vinci, but it wasn't as special as it is today. So just like in the movies, Vincenzo stayed, he hid in the closet stayed until night when the museum was closed, got out of the closet and took the painting. And he started to run with the painting under his jacket. And it was funny because when he tried to open the door of the museum to get out, the doorknob actually fell off, and a plumber happens to be walking by outside, and he called the plumber, and the plumber actually let him out. The Mona Lisa was missing for 2 years, and it became like the news of the moment. Here's another piece of newspaper from Paris. And what happened is, like, back then there was no internet, so this picture became the most printed piece of art in history. So now everybody in the world knew about this painting, you know, and that's why when it was recovered 2 years later, it became a sensation. And to this day, the Louvre Museum takes 10 million visitors, a lot of them drawn by the Mona Lisa. I went myself a few years ago, and I couldn't really enjoy the painting because there was a crowd. You have to look at it from the very far, you know. But what I want to say is that sometimes there's more than meets the eye. It's okay to take reality at face value most of the time, but it's very important that we question why things are the way they are, especially in the tech industry when we research how people use our products, you know. Everything we think the way it is not like that. For example, we think that D&I, diversity and inclusion in the tech industry, is a problem because there are not enough candidates to hire from underrepresented minorities. That's not the case. It goes much more deeper than that. Or there are people who now don't want to get the COVID vaccine because they're afraid of the side effect. That's not the reason why they don't want to get the vaccine. There are more. It goes deeper than that. A great example is yummy food. Frank, for example, I love bacon and I love chocolate ice cream. Do you like those as well?
Yeah, I like those too. Any kind of ice cream, to be honest.
I see. Those actually, there's nothing yummy about those food. Like there's nothing inherently yummy about bacon, because to a rabbit, the bacon is not yummy. To a rabbit, for example, chocolate ice cream is not yummy because he needs different nutrients. We humans need these nutrients, so for us it's yummy. So we don't like this food because it's yummy. The food is yummy because we like it. All of this and more can be summarized in a field called behavioral economics. And I want to recommend you the podcast Free Economics Radio, all the free economics books. They give you an idea how there's more than meets the eye on the way things are. And I lived most of my life, Frank, in a very naive way, taking the world, the reality at face value. And I learned in these 2 years at Microsoft that there is always more than meets the eye. There is a hidden story to things, and we got to exercise curiosity to actually understand and then be able to build the best products that we can that is going to empower the people across the planet. So, Frank, that's what I have for you today. But I'll have more for you next time.
See you next time. Bye. Okay. Always so funny. I didn't know Mona Lisa was stolen for 2 years.
Yeah, no. It's news to me.
I had no idea either.
So I see the time flying, and I want to make sure after this last demo we have time. So briefly, Damien, what's this demo is about?
Yeah, so we're going to take that action that we have, and we're going to kind of reduce the repetitiveness. So you might have seen there's a lot of kind of copied and paste code. So we're going to try and fix that. Excellent.
So let's run the demo. So Damien, in a previous demo, you show us like how to CI, CD, and deploy to our different environment. But I noticed that there was like a lot of copy paste in your YAML file. So, and I know copy paste is not the best thing. So is there a way we could improve that?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few ways that you can reduce copy and paste. So, I mean, this is all demo code, obviously, so I'm not doing things exactly the way I would want to do them. One thing that, you picked up on was the fact that I'm duplicating that for each of the deployments. I'm building my application, I'm packaging it up, and then I'm deploying it to Azure. And really, all of those steps could be in one group of steps. So there are a couple of options available to me. I could write my own action, so my own composite action, and that lets me, build a few different steps together so I can reuse them a little bit later. But there's a new feature that's come out very recently called reusable workflows. And I thought I'd show you that as an example of kind of reducing this.
It looked
yeah.
way simpler than coding my own action.
Yeah. And I mean, the composite actions are relatively straightforward and quite similar, but the reusable workflows mean that you can actually just call them from other workflows in a much nicer way rather than having to use, this specific action that I've made somewhere. It's just another thing in your repository that you can call into. So I'll jump into this. I'm going to come back to, this is the publish YAML file that I showed before. And just to highlight the repetitiveness here, I've got some unique things. So the name of my job and the environment that it's deploying to. But beyond that, it's pretty much the same. I'm choosing that it runs on there. Here are my steps. The steps are all the same. The only thing that's really different is that URL here. The secret is going to be different, and then the slot name is going to be different as well. So there's only a couple of things that are different, and I'm repeating them over here as well for production. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create, or I've already created, a reusable version of this. So this is a little bit different, and I'm going to highlight a couple of them. We saw last time that there were two ways of triggering this release, and we're going to use those same two ways here. So when we publish a new release in GitHub, we'll fire off this workflow and then workflow dispatch. So we're going to do the same thing here, but my steps or my jobs are much simpler. There's my staging job, which uses this publish to Azure reusable workflow, passing in a few variables, so a few inputs, and then some secrets as well. So my secret for that environment. And then I'm going to do the same thing in production, passing in the same details, but just for prod. So you can see already that's a little bit shorter. If I was going to do another environment like, pre-prod or something like that, then I just need to reproduce this rather than all of those steps.
And the use where you call that other flow, it needs to be an absolute path?
Yeah, it does at the moment.
Okay.
So it's also qualified by a ref, so a Git ref, basically. So I can choose the branch or a specific commit or a version, for example. So basically I'm saying, here is the path to the thing that I'm using. Use the one that's this version or the one that's in this branch, for example.
Oh, that's cool.
So this is the caller. So this is the one that's calling that reusable workflow. Let's have a look at the workflow itself, because that's a little bit different too. So let's look at the callee, like the workflow that I'm actually calling. So this is the publish to Azure workflow. And the first thing you'll notice is that the triggers are much more comprehensive. There's a lot more in here. Our trigger is just a workflow call. And what that's saying is this workflow can be called from another workflow. And then I get to define my inputs. So we get a lot of control here. We can define the type of the input, whether it's required or not, default values and the description and so on. This just gives you a bit more information when you're calling it. So we're asking for the environment we're deploying to, the URL that it's going to deploy to, the name of the slot, and by default, that's going to be staging. And then we're also specifying that we want a secret called this, and that's required. And then our jobs, we're just doing this once now. So we're deploying to that environment defined by environments. Now, if you remember in our last demo, we had pulled the secrets from that environment, and we've set the process to mean that I have to approve environments. I have to approve a release to production, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So if this environment name comes through with production, all of this takes effect. So I get that environment protection for whatever environment name I pass in, and I get the variable that I use further down for that environment as well. So I can kind of pass these things through really nicely. And then we just do it once. We just do our deployment to that slot using that secret that we've got from that environment. Now, it ultimately works pretty much the same way. If we just jump back to our actions, we can see we've got our workflows. I'll just zoom out so you can see what it would normally look like. We have our publish to Azure action, which hasn't really been run specifically because I can only call that from another workflow. That's the only trigger I've got. But publish reusable ultimately does exactly the same thing. We can choose where it's going to go, and the UI works exactly the same way. It's just less repetitive. And if I wanted to add another environment, I can easily do that. So exactly the same workflow, just in a nicer way.
Oh, that's awesome. So like if there's something that changed in an environment, or like something changed, now you don't need to apply those changes everywhere. You just do it once, and then like because of that repetitive structure that you created, like everything will just fall into places. That's cool.
So in my case, I just have a staging and production environment, but I could have a pull request environment for every pull request that comes out, or a one for every branch, and I just have to use that one reusable workflow. And if the process changes for deploying, then I only have to change in one spot.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for that demo. And I'm sure we have a lot of questions. So let's join the chat and see what they have. Oh my God. I was having so much fun. I asked in the chat, like, hey, did you learn something? I'm always curious when we do this show. Like, does people learn something, or is it something they all knew already? So I ask in the chat, and please answer in the comment or in the chat. And I was very surprised by Damien saying, yes, I learned that when Elisa was told it.
Yeah. Yep. I didn't know that, but I can totally relate to the standing behind a row of 15 people to look at the Mona Lisa. It's much smaller than you think too. Yeah.
What if we fall back on track? So any question on your side, Sebastian?
Yeah, there is a question. And by the way, this is to frame it. This is one of the features that is super important in the enterprise space when you have a lot of enterprise developers, to reduce reusability or reduce the amount of code, right? And so one of the questions that I have is, can I make sure that people in the organization use a specific reusable workflow? Can I enforce it?
Yes. So at the moment, you can't force people to use that workflow. If they want to use their own version of that, then you can. I think generally the pattern we take at GitHub is allowing people to work the way that they want to work. What you can do though is encourage them to use it because it's the easiest way to do things. So that's generally the process we take. But yeah, you can't make people use that rather than the individual ones.
Right. How about sharing a reusable workflow?
Yeah, so that's the other side of it. Making it really easy to use those reusable workflows is really important too. So there's two things that you need to be able to use a reusable workflow. Either the workflow is in the same repository, or it's in a public repository. So in your organization, you could have that workflow defined in a public repository, and then any other repo can use that workflow, which is why we fully qualify, where that definition comes from. So yeah, it makes it really easy to share across your repository that way.
Awesome. You know what? The time is flying when we have a lot of fun, and we are already at the end of the show. I want to make sure I share. So coming next, I have an echo. Coming up next, we have stay tuned to learn about foundation of data science for machine learning. Very interesting topic. And I will be giving you a rendezvous for tomorrow for the last episode of Hello World, last episode of season 2. And of course, all the links are in the description. So any information to get you started are provided by Damien and Sebastien and Rizal. So we share a bunch of links while doing the recording. So everybody have a nice day, and I see you tomorrow. Bye.
Yeah.